Welcome everyone to the next webinar in the CMHDARN Research Skills webinar series. This is webinar 6 and we'll be going over research methodologies today. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am on today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The CMHDARN Research Skills webinar series is an ongoing project aimed at supporting people to build their research skills in the non-government, mental health and drug and alcohol sectors. All webinars have been presented by people who are experts in both research and our sectors. We've had webinars on why research should be conducted, the ethical considerations of research, how to develop a research question, and much more. Now, today we're going to be talking about research methodologies. Should you use quantitative or qualitative research? How do you pick the methodology that's going to work best for you? Now, we're very fortunate to have Professor Angelina Dawson presenting today. Professor Dawson is a public health social scientist with expertise in maternal and reproductive health service delivery to priority populations in Australia and low and middle income countries. She's an NHMRC Translational Research Fellow, and she has been involved in the evaluation of Aboriginal child health programs across New South Wales. She's a chief investigator on an ARC-funded discovery project examining the use of qualitative research to inform policy and practice in Aboriginal health services. Angela has been involved in CMHDARN for many years and in a variety of ways, and is always very supportive of practice-based research and the translation of research into practice. After Angela's presentation, she'll be joined by me, Dr. Rose Miller, who I'm the Research and Data Management Officer at NADA. So my background is in psychology. I'm a research psychologist, and I primarily work with the NADA base, which is the client data management support system that's provided by NADA for the use of our members. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Angela and take it away.
Thank you very much, Rose. Just let me share my screen. Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I first of all would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional lands of the Darkinjin people, whose country I'm standing on today, and pay my respect to elders, both past, present and future. And I'd like to warmly welcome any First Nations people who are joining us this afternoon. So I'm just, because I'm zooming in from Yango National Park, I'm hoping that there won't be any technical difficulties, but if so, just bear with me and we'll get through it. So welcome to, as Rose said, thank you for the introduction, Rose. This is webinar 6 on research methodologies. Now, what I'd like to do is provide an overview of various methodologies at a very, at an entry level, really. And what I'd like to do is have the session so that it's a point of entry, and I'd like to make it accessible so you can begin to think about the questions you might want to answer and how you're going to answer them. So basically, how you might start to design a study and answer the questions that you have. Now, I know we're Zooming and it's a bit of chalk and talk here, but there might be a way that we can make this as interactive as possible. I wonder if I'm going to ask you a few questions throughout the session, and some of you might be super duper shy, and that's cool. But you could just respond perhaps even in your head or jot it down in on the notes. And for those who are a little braver, you might like to respond in the chat. And for those who are mega confident, maybe you've got lots of questions, you can hang on to those later, and we'll have a bit of a sort of Q&A session at the end. So first up, why do we do health research? Now, I know you've had a session here, but this is just a quick kind of regroup of your ideas. So why are we doing health research? Well, basically, of course, we want to understand what's out there. We want to discover new facts. We want to verify those facts. We want to test them. We want to identify cause and effect. So an intervention, what is its relationship to a health issue or a condition? We want to develop new tools or weapons. So basically, we want to generate evidence and we want to fill a knowledge gap. But this knowledge gap needs to be a significant one. It can't be one that you just sort of wake up in the morning and it comes to your mind. We need to obviously look into the research, and we need to ask questions, and those might be questions like what do and what is questions. For example, what's the relationship between X and Y? And you'll need to develop a hypothesis to do this. So, of course, for those who know what a hypothesis is, it's a proposed explanation, a reason why something might be the way it is. And that is based on limited evidence. So it's really a starting point that you might use to begin your investigation. Now, we don't always just want to fill a knowledge gap. We also want to solve problems. And again, that's going to be informed by lots of reading. Sorry about that, guys, but in the world of research, we're constantly, well, it used to be in books and papers, but now it's on the net. We're constantly reading. So you need to think about how, if anyone else has had a go at solving this problem and what has worked before, because we don't really want to reinvent wheels. We don't want to waste our time doing research where there are already, answers or insights. So if we want to solve problems, we want to ask why and how questions. Now, of course, we're doing research because we want to ensure that the practice we're doing in mental health and drug and alcohol is evidence-based. So we need to align the best practice, research evidence, with consumer preferences and needs, and of course our clinical or provider expertise. So we need to keep that, I suppose, front and foremost. Now, where do we start? Okay, so of course we're going to be drawn in by lots of intriguing phenomena, things that we're passionate about, our interests. But we're also going to be doing research to respond to consumer needs and to government expectations. And I mentioned before the reading. Yep, we've just got to embrace that reading and immerse ourselves in it. And we need to not only form the question, but also if we're doing a certain type of research, we might have to develop a hypothesis. And I know you've already had a session on developing research questions, so we won't dwell on that. Now, there are two approaches to doing research, and you know these well. You've heard of qualitative studies, and they ask the who, what, where, when, how questions. So they're interested in learning about the nature of a phenomenon. Whereas the quantitative side of the coin is interested in how much. Okay, it's interested in frequency or occurrence, how many things happen, or the association between two factors, or in fact, multiple factors. Now, they're not mutually exclusive. They can come together and they exist on a continuum. And this is really important to note, because they're not, one definition of qualitative research is not necessarily all definitions of qualitative research. Now, I wanted to show you this video, but that explains some of the differences between qualitative and quantitative research. But I can't do this because of my technical limitations. I'm sorry about that, guys. But I'll leave it for you to watch later. And it's not very exciting in its presentation, but it's really nice in terms of the dialogue between these two animated figures and their understanding or their positions about the differences between qualitative and quantitative research. So I'll leave that for you to look at later. But let's sort of dig into some of the common contrasts between these two research approaches. Now, you probably have these things in your head at the moment, so I'm going to bring them up slowly, and you can either think about them and jot them down, or perhaps you already know them already. So if I was doing quantitative research, I'm going to be focused on numbers, whereas in qualitative research, obviously, I'm going to be looking at words. Much more important, I'm thinking about texts and discourses, whereas I'm counting, I'm calculating numbers in quantitative research. In quantitative research, I'm very focused on the point of view of the researcher, whereas in qualitative, I want to know about the participants. The researcher is often distant, or we take an objective stance in qualitative research, whereas I'm up close and personal with my participants in qualitative research. So I'm really, it's very subjective as opposed to that objective stance. I'm testing theories most of the time in quantitative research. Well, I am doing that sometimes in qualitative research, but I'm more interested in the theory that emerges from the data that I collect. I'm often static in quantitative research. I'm observing, I'm looking at an experiment, whereas in qualitative research, I want to be part of a process, and I'm keen to understand how that process is actually unfolding. Quantitative research is highly structured. Okay, I want to know what I'm doing from beginning to end. In qualitative research, it's more organic or iterative, highly unstructured, and we are comfortable with that, whereas a quantitative researcher would be living on the edge of their seat if they had to take things as they unfolded. I want to do quantitative research because I want to generalize things to the broader population. I want to sample representatively so that I can derive insights at a population level. But I'm not too concerned about that in qualitative research. I'm interested in what the context is showing me. I want to get deep down and into what's happening right in front of me. I'm not interested in hard, reliable data like a quantitative researcher would be. I'm interested in the rich tapestry of meaning that's emerging from the data I'm collecting with my participants up close and personal. I'm interested in the macro look as a quantitative researcher, the big picture. Now, I'm interested in the micro as a quantitative researcher. These are also, I'm pitching these things as opposites. And as I said, they're not always that way, but it's helpful to understand in the first instance. Quantitative researchers are interested in behavior. I'm interested in meaning as a qualitative researcher. Often the settings in which quantitative research is taking place are artificial, they're created, whereas they're more natural in qualitative research. So, you have your randomized controlled trials in quantitative research where I create an artificial environment. So I watch how a drug or an intervention, a behavioral intervention affects people. But I'm interested, if I'm doing qualitative research, and how people are interacting in their natural setting. So again, remembering that these are juxtaposed differences that are really kind of at the end of a continuum. Now, it's not good enough to know the differences, these differences between the two approaches. You need to make a decision about how you're going to move forward in answering your research question. So you'll need to choose a position, and that's also known as a philosophical stance. So this underpins and directs how you actually undertake your research, and it informs the methodology that you're going to take. And I'm going to give you some examples. So this is my dog Whiskey, and we're going to use the theme of this beautiful Kelpie of mine to talk through how these methodologies might look in real life in terms of a research question. Okay, so we're going to look into now paradigms, worldviews or paradigms. So a paradigm it's really a cluster of beliefs that dictates how researchers approach the study and interpret the results. So it's sometimes aligned with a particular discipline, but some disciplines, particularly in the social science area, can actually have multiple paradigms. So it can be a little confusing, but let's take it nice and slow so that we can get our heads around some of these paradigms. Again, just cautioning you, these things are not necessarily discrete in the boxes that I'm going to show, but are along a continuum, okay? So I've got the old ComDARN logo here. Apologies to everyone, but I really liked it because it had the magnifying glass. And this paradigm's also, known as a lens. So when you put your magnifying glass over your research, that could be your different paradigm. And in these boxes, according to great writers in research, Denson and Lincoln and Cresswell, they have mapped out 5 different types of research paradigms. And these are, again, a way of grouping philosophical ideas to help us undertake our research. So as you can see on the far here is postpositivism. Okay, so this is, so I'll go into detail about these in a minute. And then there's constructivism, or also known as interpretism. In the middle, critical theory, we've got poststructuralism, and at the end, pragmatism. Now, there are different beliefs of reality along this continuum. And that's, you might have heard of the word ontology. If you haven't, don't worry. It's you don't need to know it. All you need to understand is there are different ways in these paradigms of understanding reality. So at one end of positivism or post-positivism, that people doing research in that paradigm, they basically believe there is only one reality, okay? Whereas as we move further across to constructivism and critical theory, we are interested in multiple realities, how different people see the world in different ways. So that's also called relativism. Now, some of you may know this word post-structuralist, a little bit complicated. Again, I'll talk about that in more detail. But really, the guys working out of that camp, they actually, it's called overdetermination. Their theory of the world is actually their reality. So reality is fluid, and it changes no matter what time or space you're working in. Now, there are also different ways of knowing across this continuum, and that's called epistemology. Again, it's another jargon term. It's really, what it means is ways of knowing. And this determines a relationship between the researcher and what is being researched. Okay, so that's epistemology. Let's dig in a bit closely. Now, post-positivism. Let's look at that. What the heck is post-positivism? Well, this is really the basis of scientific knowledge, experimental knowledge. So knowledge that's generated through the use of controlled observations and experimentation in an attempt to confirm explanations. So things are observed empirically. It's the emic view, so the outsider looking in. We're very objective. We're doing objective experiments to reach the truth. Now, this will ring true with you. I think everyone is across the scientific method. Now, remember I said that I would give some examples in relation to my dog. I know this is a bit silly, but it kind of helped my son actually understand research. So one day, my son Seamus, he said to me, "Mum, why does our dog have a tail?" And I said, "Oh, that's a really interesting question. Why do you think a dog's got a tail?" And he said, "I think dogs have got tails to help them swim better." And so we were up on our property, and he's looking, Seamus looking across the dam, and there was Whiskey swimming. And I said, oh, well, that's a really great hypothesis that you've reached. How would you test that hypothesis? And he said, well, what I do is I get two dogs, put them in 2 baths of water, maybe make it clear so I could watch them swim. And I'd cut the tail off one dog and keep the tail on the other one. And then I'd time to see how long it took them to swim across this area. And then I'd observe, maybe I could just take notes or whatever, of what's happening. I said, that's excellent. Apart from the ethical issues in that experiment, Seamus, that's a really good example of perhaps a randomized controlled trial. So it's not really a naturalistic experiment, it's artificial and it's using an experiment. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, let's have a look at the next paradigm here, which is called Constructivism, or called Interpretivism. Now, this paradigm studies how people, through their participation in social processes, enact their particular realities and how they endow them with meanings, how they give them meanings, beliefs and intentions, and help the members of those groups construct their social actions or their norms, their beliefs, their values. And what we're interested here is multiple participant meanings and theory generation. And it's happening in naturalistic environments, okay? So knowledge is obtained by increasing the proximity between researcher and the researched, or the participant, as we call it in this paradigm. And it's an emic, an insider approach. So let's go to the silly example of my dog. So what we might do is we might have a question such as, well, why does a dog have a tail? And we would design a naturalistic ethnographic study with immersion in the field to study the social meaning that dogs give to the way in which their tail is used. So we might go out into the bush and we might sit with a pack of dingoes. In fact, this is one researcher does this in the Blue Mountains and has followed various packs of dingoes for years. And we might observe how these various dogs interact and what the tail actually means to these dogs. Okay, so that's a nice ethnographic study with some dingoes in the field, quite hard work. Let's move forward and have a look at critical theory. Now, critical theory seeks to generate theory from action or practice in order to help people address change. And this is in the interest of social justice, okay? So the fundamental basis of this is achieving social justice. And it's collaborative, it's politically orientated and change orientated. So it emerged from a German group called the Frankfurt School, and their focus was on liberating human beings from systems that enslave them. And there are lots of other theorists related to this, Huberman and Gramsci, if you're interested. But this particular paradigm, it foregrounds participatory approaches. So how might we do this in my silly dog example? Well, we might ask about thinking back to the poor dog who had his tail taken off, which is a common practice of tail docking in some dog. I'm not too sure if it's illegal in New South Wales, but we might ask, what is the experience of a dog who's lost their tail? And if we were going to do critical research, we might actually design an action research project with dogs, or most likely the dog's owners perhaps, who have had their tail removed, and we might capture the pain of this process and advocate for the end of tail docking. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. Now, this last, or let's say the penultimate one, is quite difficult. So let's take you through post-structuralism. Now, I suppose we can define that in relation to structuralism. It actually opposes structuralist theory, so that says that meaning is predictable. And so post-structuralists, they say meaning is very unpredictable. Meaning is contextually determined, and it changes, it's transformed over time and in the different contexts. So the meaning's fluid, and in this paradigm, we're interested in liminality, what the things in between. So there's no external reality, and reality is what we perceive it to be. Knowledge is contextual, as I said. What post-structuralists are interested in is inverting binary opposites. So things become interesting, I should say, when we reveal the arbitrariness of meaning systems attached to opposites, so male and female. Well, we know that there is not one definition of male and there is not one definition of females, meaning there is not fixed. And one of the great scholars in this area is Michel Foucault. You may all know about the Foucauldian view and about his very important book, Madness and Civilization, that examined the binary opposites between, imbued in the word sane and mad. And his book basically argues that those who were defined as mad were the people who challenged the system, they bucked the system, and they were removed because they were against the norm. They were not seen as the norm. They were put in institutions and separated from society. So basically, post-structuralism is disruptive. And if we were to think about how we might do a post-structuralist experiment with in relation to the silly example of my dog, we might have a question about what is it like to be a dog, or what is a dog rather? What is a dog? And so we could focus on the binary opposites here between the relationship between humans and animals. What is a relationship between a dog and humans? So we always say, oh, a dog is a pet. Well, maybe in fact the human is the dog's pet. So we think about things in a different way, and we might do, we challenge the foundations of what is the norm in post-structuralism. And to our final paradigm, this is the pragmatic paradigm, and it's usually associated with mixed methods research. So it's knowledge of a thing is knowledge of what you can do with it. So it's pluralistic, it's problem-centered, real-world practice-orientated. So I might conduct a pragmatic experiment, and I might combine paradigms to do so. I might combine the post-positive experiment to examine the purpose of the dog's tail to discover that it impedes the swimming of the dogs, with a study that seeks to advocate for the ending of tail docking by examining the pain and distress that the process causes. Okay, well, I hope that that has given you a good overview of where we're at with these different paradigms. But wait, don't fall asleep yet. There is more. So just spreading these paradigms out, what I want to dive into more is more about qualitative methodologies and quantitative. So qualitative methodologies are aligned with some of these paradigms, some more than others, and the same goes for quantitative research. So qualitative research, for example, is much more aligned with constructivist, critical theory, and post-structuralist paradigms, whereas quantitative research obviously is more aligned with post-positivism, whereas pragmatism allows us to combine both qualitative and quantitative research and multiple paradigms. So we can do pragmatism allows us to do deductive and inductive work at the same time. Now let's focus a little bit on qualitative research. this, I've just put this up to begin with because it's the Indian fable of the elephant. So what they did is they put an elephant in a dark room and got a number of people who had never seen an elephant before to describe what the elephant was. And so someone at the tusks in the dark was feeling the tusks and said, "Oh, I think an elephant is a spear." Whereas someone putting their arm around the trunk thinking, "Oh, this feels like a python, it's a snake." Whereas again, someone around one of the legs feels like a tree trunk to me. Whereas someone right at the end near the tail felt that the elephant really, it was a rope. So I suppose what this is saying is how you do research and what you find depends on your theoretical perspective. So qualitative research is interested in the why questions. So we might have questions such as, what are the consumer's experience of healthcare, accessing care and keeping healthy? What are the perceived needs for healthcare and services? Understanding different perspectives. We might do research, qualitative research to do that. And how the experiences, attitudes and life circumstances affects health needs and behaviours. So this is a nice diagram because it clarifies what qualitative research is about. And it's really about exploring this tapestry of human phenomena to understand the shared understandings of reality and the variations in it. So for health research, what works or does not, and what's understood or not, and how healthcare services and information can best meet the needs of people. So what we might be interested in is what people say, the knowledge they have, what they understand. We're really there and researching the conscious mind. And we might also be interested in what people mean. What are the emotional drivers, the conscious and unconscious things that are underpin what people say. We might also, related to that, be interested in researching the psyche. Now, what people do is also one of the focuses of qualitative research, because the actions people take and what they see themselves doing are really important. We're interested in understanding meaningful behaviour, because what people do is not always what they say they do either, obviously. And culture is really central to qualitative research. The culture within where people live, the cultural forces and the meaning systems. We're interested in researching the shared meanings, norms and codes of that culture. Now, qualitative research methodology, methods and data gathering techniques are many. So these methodologies take different positions along that continuum that I showed you. So down one side here, we've got the methodologies. We can have a descriptive qualitative methodology that's much more towards the postpositivist paradigm than, say, the poststructuralist paradigm. I've already talked about ethnography. I'm sure you're all aware of that deep immersion in the field. Phenomenology is an approach where we're trying to understand people's experiences, and we may have deep, unstructured interviews with a small number of people in order to understand what people's experiences of a particular phenomenon are. Grounded theory, that's a methodology that seeks to develop a theory out of data, an emergent theory, so that data is collected and then a theory is devised based on that, on the findings. And action research, I'm sure you're aware of that. That's that one aligned with critical theory, where it's participatory, collaborative, and underpinned by social justice. Discourse analysis and feminist research are much more aligned with the post-structuralist paradigm that I mentioned, deconstructing how we see things. And discourse analysis often works with text, so we look into those texts to find out how meaning is constructed through rhetorical devices. And feminist research looks at power and knowledge and who is being foregrounded or valued. Now, we might collect data through a variety of means. We can interview people. It could be structured or semi-structured, unstructured. We might run focus group discussions. If we're working with First Nations people, we might use yarning. We might observe, and we might be a participant observer or a non-participant observer. And of course, we can do a lot of research using documents too. The far column there is really around the way in which we might analyze this. So it might be thematic, we might do content analysis, we might map things conceptually, we'll take people's life histories. So that's really about qualitative research. Now, quantitative research. So yes, feelings can be hard to quantify, but they actually can be, and we use a number of tools and instruments to do that. So really it's about asking the how much questions. So what are the demographic characteristics of consumers who access your service? How do the severity of dependence scores compare for women at the start of this program, at exit 3 months later? Well, what's a relationship between client outcomes in the client-centered therapy and the psychoanalytic therapy groups? So it's important to identify the variables that you intend to measure, manipulate, or control if you're going to do quantitative research. And there's also descriptive versus comparative, or the relationship between them. But let's have a look at some of the research designs that inform quantitative, sorry, getting mixed up. All right, so quantitative research. Now, we have two, I suppose, branches. On one side, we've got descriptive quantitative research, and on the other, we've got analytic. So under the descriptive branch here, I'm not going to look at qualitative, just talked about qualitative, but we've got survey designs, and they are very descriptive. They're mostly known as cross-sectional designs, where we go out, we survey a particular population. It's a cross-section of that population. A lot of studies involve cross-sectional survey designs. On the analytic side, we have either experimental or observational studies. So I think you're all across what a randomized controlled trial is. And that could be a crossover trial, for example, where an intervention comparison is made within patients or consumers rather than across them. So we'd only really use that for chronic or stable conditions, such as one example might be opioid replacement therapies. So the patient would follow one treatment and then break. That's called a washout period. And then they would take another treatment. Then we could check the response to drug A compared with patients' responses to drug B in those different sessions. So patients basically in a crossover trial act as their own controls. I hope that makes sense. So that actually helps us remove the possibility of bias. So on the other side, we might have observational studies such as cohort, cross-sectional, or case control. So cohort, I suppose comes from the Roman Latin word from groups of soldiers. This really is about a longitudinal analysis of risk factors, often used to follow a group of people who don't have a condition. And it uses correlations to study the risk of developing that condition over time. Whereas a cross-sectional study is when you have a defined population and you study their health issues and exposure to particular risks at one point in time. Case control studies are mostly retrospective, so after the fact, and they have a health condition that you're studying, but the controls don't. But there are problems with that because often there's recall bias, but they are good for things such as disease outbreaks. So we have actually quite a number of case control studies looking at COVID-19 at the moment. So when you're in the thick of it, that this design is useful. So I mentioned that we have descriptive and analytical methodologies. So descriptive, often using questionnaires. So we might use Likert scales to describe the magnitude of a condition. We can use observational checklists as well. Now, in the analytical side of things, these are really more about intervention or experimental studies. So we want to look at if there's an association between one factor and, for example, exposure to a treatment. Now, in these different approaches, the descriptive studies, we use descriptive statistics to produce frequency counts, measures of central tendency, means, etc. Maybe measures of dispersion, standard deviations and all of that, if you know the bell curve. But when we're doing analytical studies, we're using inferential statistics. We want to develop measures of generalization about larger groups, and we might make predictions and undertake modeling so we could see into the future. We're concerned about sampling here, various measurements, scale, randomization. Those are all really important things to be aware of when we're doing quantitative research. And as I already mentioned, some of the tools for gathering data. Now, mixed methods. This is something that really provides us often with a comprehensive picture. It combines qualitative, quantitative approaches and can answer complex questions that one approach can't do on its own. And if you recall, that's within that pragmatic paradigm. So Pierce, I love this quote, says, "We must let no method stand in the way of inquiry." So the kind of questions that we might ask around if we wanted to take on a mixed methods study, we might be wanting to look at something from multiple perspectives. We might get a finding that's rather odd. Say we run a survey and we get an unexpected finding, and we might want to understand why that is so with some focus group discussions or interviews from people who have reported that unusual finding. We might use mixed methods to develop a theory and then test that. So we might do grounded theory research and develop that theory, and then we might go out and design a tool like a survey to test that, or an instrument to test it. We also, many of us need to do evaluation research to see, to look at the performance of our services. And obviously, if you're going to do that properly, you'll need to have both perspectives in your evaluation. So there are different approaches. I'll just whip through these because I see that time's getting on. So we might do, we might have an exploratory mixed method design, and this would involve the qualitative research first, collecting that and analyzing that, and then that would inform our quantitative research. So we might, as I said, do some focus group discussions to build a tool, and then we might test that tool. An explanatory design is just the opposite. We do the quantitative data first, and then we collect the qualitative data. And that's helpful when we want to use qualitative findings to help interpret or contextualize quantitative findings. Now, many people talk about triangulation, and this is when we collect the quantitative and the qualitative data at the same time. And the primary purpose of this is really for confirming or corroborating or validating two different data sets, and we compare that and we look at the differences between them, because we want to get, maybe we want to confirm that what people are saying is what they're doing. Now, it's a gorgeous satin bowerbird. We collect data, we collect lots of it, and it is often overwhelming. But just to reiterate the different types of approaches to collecting data across quantitative, mixed methods, and qualitative research. So as you can see, as you move from the qualitative to the quantitative, things become more structured and more formal, and the surveys become more closed. The instruments become tighter. The observations become formal and structured. And not to forget that we can also do research using secondary data. We don't always have to collect the primary data. In fact, there's so much data, not only quantitative data, but there's also qualitative data that we can use and reinterpret. So now to your study, designing your study. What methodology, design, and method? So you need to have that research question right in front of you and ask yourself, what approach would be best to answer this question? What is the position I want to take? And that will tell you if it should be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. And you'll know this because you'll be thinking about the paradigm that you're going to take. And so the best study design obviously will emerge from that. And then you'll be led to the type of data you need to collect. We don't start with, I'm going to do a study and I'm going to interview a few people. No, 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 no. We start with understanding what is my position and what sort of paradigm do I want to be in, helping me to choose my methodology, helping me to choose whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or both together, I should say. And then we say, I think I might do some interviews or focus groups because that will be the best way of collecting that data. So this is hard to be interactive, but I'm going to leave these with you because there are a number of papers that I looked at the other day to help us sort of look to see how researchers might have designed their studies. So we'll just look at a couple. So this study asked, the question was, what are the experiences of rural mental health professionals who care for clients diagnosed with a mental illness and a coexisting alcohol and other drug disorder? Now, what do you think? What kind of approach would best answer that question? So immediately one would be going to experiences. Oh, they want to know about experiences. And qualitative research would sound like a really appropriate way forward here, and probably phenomenology. Okay, so we want to understand the experiences of these professionals, and we want to understand the roles and how complex they were and the skills involved. Let's have a look at another one. This is from another paper. What is the relationship among neighborhood stresses, stress buffering mechanisms, and likelihood of alcohol, drug, and mental health disorders in adolescence? Okay, so this is sounding like it needs a hypothesis, and it's sounding like we need to collect some quantitative data, and that's exactly what the study did. They hypothesized that the greater presence of neighborhood stresses would be associated with one of these disorders, and they used cross-sectional survey data and they used census data to look into the neighborhoods. So that's a quantitative study. Here's a lovely question. What cultural values and understandings are important in the care and treatment of Samoan people with mental health problems? Well, clearly that would be qualitative, But this study, in fact, draws upon Indigenous methodology and post-structuralist decolonizing theory to understand what care and treatment people actually needed. And here we have what are the outcomes of the first 3 months of operation of an Australian mental health peer support service, providing hospital avoidance and early discharge support to consumers of adult mental health services. So this was actually largely quantitative, so collecting key performance indicators because it was an evaluation and readmission rates. And here's again another quantitative study, the role of perceived stigma and attitudes to seeking care in predicting help seeking from GPs for mental health problems. And finally, let's just go to this one. The final one here, how can we ask young Aboriginal people who use illicit drugs about their health concerns and service preferences? Well, this actually was a mixed method study, and it was a sequential mixed method. So qualitative data was collected using focus groups, and that informed the development of this survey, a audio computer assisted self-interviewing survey. So I hope that that has given you a nice overview of methods in research.
Thank you so much, Angela. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them through the Q&A. Actually, while we wait, I do have a question for you, Angela, if you're up for it. So great presentation,
yeah, go for it.
Thank you. So I was, of your previous experiences, I assume you've been involved in a study that's used a mixed approach? Yeah, that's, yeah, because it makes sense. Do you recall a case where the qualitative or the quantitative data help inform what you found in the other?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, I just gave you an example. That last one was a beautiful study. So the qualitative focus group interviews with young Indigenous people who used drugs. Basically, out of that emerged some common themes that helped us actually design this tool. So that the paper just talks about that, but what actually happened in real life was that, of course, but then there were more questions that came when we designed the tool. We had to evaluate the tool, and we did that qualitatively, and then that kind of fed back to the focus groups, and we re-interviewed some of the initial participants and some others to refine the questions in the tool. And it actually opened up a Pandora's box of other issues that need research. So does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that's I mean, it's always the next. The next.
It's never ending research. Now we've got someone who's asking a question.
Yeah, so I can ask Barney Adam, what are the majority of quant data studies about formulating a hypothesis? That is what questions?
Yes, Barney.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, you need a hypothesis. Now, it's really interesting because the world is quite dominated by quantitative research, and you know, we're always asked for a hypothesis, and so qualitative researchers have to kind of adapt and put out their questions. But yes, a hypothesis is really, it's the theory. So you're going to test something and you need this theory. Okay.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Angela.
Any more?
Yes. Any more coming through?
Now, if you're super shy, I'm very happy to answer questions after, you know, as things emerge and you do your research, that's when the questions come up. So by all means, I'm happy to take those questions after the session. via email.
Excellent. Cool. Well, yes, if there's no more questions, thank you so much, Angela, for this great introduction to research methodologies, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, and good luck, everyone.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, yes. And so for those attending, if you have questions, like as Angela was just saying, that weren't answered today, please don't hesitate to get in touch via the email that's on your screen at the moment. So thank you everyone for your participation today, and we hope to see you at the next CMHDARN Research Skills webinar, which will be announced soon. Thank you.
See you, everyone.